Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking through how to analyze social media data to draw out meaningful insights from it. If you haven't come across Listen and Learn Research before, we are a specialist social insight agency. So what that means is every day we're working with social data and we're looking to help our clients understand their audiences better and make better business decisions through analysing social data. So today I'm going to be talking you through some of our trade secrets. The webinar today, this is the actually fifth and final in a series of webinars which we have been running over the last year, covering how, when and why to use social media data for insight. So what we're hoping with this entire series, if you watch everything, is that by the end of it you should feel equipped to either commission or to have a go at running your own DIY social insight projects. So if you're interested, you can still watch back the first 4 videos which we presented, covering what social insight is, when to use it instead of traditional research methods, the different social data sources which are out there, and how to write a killer social listening query. So all of those sessions, they are still available on our Listen and Learn LinkedIn page, or you can find them on our website, which is listenandlearnresearch.com. We also this year released a written kind of user guide, how to do DIY social insights. So that goes into the whole process in a lot more detail, and you can download that from our website as well. But today, like I said, we're looking at how to analyze and how to activate on social data. So what we kind of really wanted to focus on today was how to do your analysis in a way which is systematic, and that will give you kind of both really robust quantitative insights, but also meaningful qualitative insights. I am kind of assuming that by this point, when you get to your analysis, you've already gathered your social data and you've cleaned it. If you want some pointers on how to do that, you can refer back to our last session. But today I'm going to be talking you through the process which we use as a social insight agency. So it's all around identifying signals in the social data, interpreting them quantitatively, and then qualitatively understanding them. And I'm also going to touch on some pointers for activating social data, and in particular how to position it and what to think about when you're presenting it back to your client or your stakeholders. So, how do you analyze social data? The first step, once you've got a clean social data set, is obviously to start reading it. But if you have spent any time with social data in the past, you'll know that it's unstructured, it's messy. So what we need is a way to enable us to make sense of the data and not become overwhelmed by the extent of it. And the way that we do this is that we build a code frame. And what a code frame does, it helps you basically to structure your data, structure your analysis, and establish a clear narrative. And it stops you getting kind of lost in rabbit holes in the data, which is really easy to do if you don't have some structure when you're looking at social data. So how do you build a code frame? What we do is we use an approach which is quite common in qual research called grounded theory, or I guess inductive reasoning. And what grounded theory is all about, it's about letting the data suggest the key themes to you and building a story that's really grounded in the data. And this is really important when it comes to social data, because one of the kind of main advantages of social is that it shows us what's naturally out there. And what I mean by that is it's different to primary research. It's different to a survey or a discussion guide, because in kind of quant and qual, essentially what you're putting in front of someone is a list of questions that matter to you, and you're getting your answers back. In social, what we see is what actually matters to the target audience. And that might not always reflect the kind of list of questions which you'd like to put in people, but it tells us what people talk about when we're not actually talking to a researcher, and that can help us find out a whole kind of host of new things. So it's really important that we approach our analysis in a way that allows us to preserve that objectivity and kind of preserve what's special about social data. So we're not predetermining the questions that we want to ask, but we're being led by the data and what's actually there. So I'm going to talk you through how to build a code frame structure analysis. The basic steps before I get into the detail are to start off by reading through a sample of your data. So typically we'd take about 100 comments. If you read through 100 comments and you feel like you're still uncovering loads of new themes by the end, then you might need more than that. But 100 is a good rule of thumb. In that sample, we're looking to identify the different signals and the different themes that are coming out of the data. And then it's about grouping up those signals into different categories. And then this basically forms a code frame, which you can use to make sense of the data. So the final step is to test your code frame and make sure it actually works. So I'll talk you through this process in a bit more detail. So when you're first developing a code frame, we kind of use these kinds of questions as just a starting point for thinking about how to develop a code frame. So you could use this as a template. It basically helps you think methodically through the different categories that you might need to use. So as you start reading through the data, you should be asking yourself questions like, who is talking? Where are they? What's happening in their lives? What's the situation? What's the context? What's driving them to post on social? What are they talking about? What are they saying? What are the different topics and the themes which are coming out of the data? How do people feel? What are the different emotions they're expressing? What's particularly important to people? So, if they're reviewing a product, what are the particular features which they're pulling out specifically? You might think about what people are doing. So what are the different actions and activities? How are people expressing themselves? So what's the language? Are they using visuals? Are they using video? Are they using memes? Is it funny? Is it serious? And also, what do people need? So what can you identify about people's needs, unmet needs, people's barriers and frustrations? And essentially, what you're looking to do within all of these broad categories is identify the different signals that sit beneath them. So within emotions, you might have people who are sad, frustrated, happy, angry, content. And these are then what you'll capture as you work through the bigger data set. So it's filling out each of these categories with all the different ways in which they're being expressed in the data. And then this is a good starting point, but based on your particular topic and what you're interested in, you might build on this. There might be other signals which you're seeing in the data which you add to your code frame as well. So when I talk about the signals which are coming out of the data, I would basically encourage you to keep your qual hat on and just be open to lots of different types of signals. So there might be kind of more practical signals like product features or locations or different audience types and different types of people that appear in the conversation. But it might also be more conceptual elements like emotion, or it might be tone of voice, or it might be values or motivations or attitudes. So like I said, it's really important that you let the data guide you as to what you're going to capture in your code frame. The kind of one exception to this, once you've built your code frame, is like if there are certain questions that you need to answer in your brief, then you might want to go back to your code frame and just check that you're going to be able to answer those. So if, for example, you want to understand how people talk about a brand, as a business or your client might have internal brand perception statements, and that could be something that you build into your code frame as well. Or if there are certain KPIs or competitors that you want to look out for, you might build those into your code frame as well, even if you can't initially see them coming out of the data. This will just help you to be able to quantify them later on and say whether or not people are talking about these different elements. Okay, so what you can see here is just a quick example. This is an extract from a real life code frame, which we have used. So you can see here the overall categories, things like the overall brand perceptions, the senior account team, HR management. These are all different ways in which people talk about a particular brand and the ways they assess that brand. And then within these overall categories, you can see some of the individual codes or signals which we saw coming out of the data. So when people were talking about their overall brand perceptions, they were talking about how efficient, how transparent, how proactive, how innovative this particular brand was. So this example is very much a kind of a practical approach to categorizing the data. It's taking into account things like those different business areas, those different KPIs. What I would encourage you to do if you're building something like this and you're interested in kind of understanding lots of different features or attributes, like brand attributes or how people feel about, HR or different product features, is not just to capture the different things that people are talking about. So what I mean by that is where people are talking about HR management, don't just capture every time someone talks about recruitment or turnover or training. You can go a step further and actually capture whether people talk about each of those attributes positively or negatively. And if you do that across your data set, across a range of different attributes, then you can quite quickly start to build a really nuanced data set that will give you a really good idea of all the different areas that are driving positivity and negativity at an overall level. Then this is another example. This is an example which has taken a much more conceptual approach. So this is looking at things like relationships and feelings. So your code frame could, and I'd say probably should, contain both types of approach, both as more practical aspects and these more conceptual aspects. So I mean, a focus on feelings here I think is interesting. So things like people expressing a feeling of curiosity or loneliness or pride. Because in a lot of our projects, we will look to capture feelings and emotions, and that's something that's kind of really important to try and do in the data. So by emotions, I mean, we're kind of looking to understand, is the person who wrote this post happy and content, or sad and disappointed, or angry and frustrated? And the reason why kind of capturing emotions can be so important is it's a much more nuanced way of thinking about sentiment in a data set. So you might have come across sentiment analysis before. It tends to get a lot of stick, so you might have heard that. But it's sentiment analysis kind of at a basic level tends to be, is this comment positive or negative? But as a measure, it's not great. It's quite imperfect. A lot of comments will have both positives and negatives in them. If you're relying on machine analysis to identify sentiment, often that's not actually very accurate because machines can't always pick up on slang and sarcasm and the ways in which humans express themselves. So we prefer to look at sentiment in a much more nuanced way. So that might be on the last slide, looking at how do people talk about different factors positively or negatively and breaking that down much more granularly. Or on the more conceptual side, on this slide, it might be thinking about using emotions instead of overall sentiment. So instead of coding a post as negative, we code whether someone is sad and disappointed, or are they angry and frustrated, because they're quite different emotional states to actually respond to as a brand. So those examples are based on text data, so stuff, Twitter, forums, blog posts, and that kind of thing. But we can also use code frames to help us make sense of image and video data. So, for example, TikTok data, Instagram data. And this type of data is much more kind of rich and nuanced and in depth. So in our code frames, we need to recognize that. So it's not just limiting ourselves to, what is the poster saying, what is the topic of this post, but also thinking about other cues as well. So to do this, I would think in 3D. So think about things like, what can you see, who or what is in the image of a video? If it's a person, you might think about how old are they, what gender are they with their friends or their family or their pets, are they alone? What brands or products are they interacting with? Where are they? Are they at home? Are they outside? Are they shopping? What activities can you see or are people doing? Are they eating or drinking or socializing? You might think about what you can hear. So if there's music in a video, what mood does that convey? Or if someone is speaking, what is their tone of voice? So obviously the way in which someone says something can change the meaning. Are they annoyed? Are they be? Are they factual? Are they trying to be funny? You might think as well more kind of generally about visuals, like what colours can you see? Are there kind of dominant shapes or objects or aesthetics that you keep noticing across different posts? And then you might want to think about all of this in context of the image or video caption. So how does the caption work alongside the image or video? And does that affect the meaning at all? And then if you want to go a step further with kind of visual and video data, it's possible to also apply semiotic analysis techniques. So thinking about identifying what are the dominant or the residual visual codes within a certain category. And obviously, if you're a brand, you can look to replicate or disrupt those codes to make your visual content more relevant. So those are some pointers for building a code frame. And then once you've built this code frame, this is basically going to help you to capture all of the signals that you find whilst working through your broader data set. So to do this, you're going to need a way to capture your coding. So we use Excel. There's loads of bits of software out there, like NVivo is a big one. But essentially, you need a way to, as you read through your data set, somewhere where you can just capture, here's someone who's sad, here's someone who's happy, here's someone who's talking about this particular product feature, here's someone who's at home or outside or whatever it might be. So the first step once you've got your code frame is to test it just to make sure it actually works. So again, I'd read through around 100 comments and just use your code frame to capture the signals as you go through. And what you're looking to do here is make sure that your code frame actually covers the realities of the data. So is there anything missing? Is there anything that's ambiguous? Are there codes that maybe overlap or have too much crossover? Is the code frame easy to use or not? And then once you've tested your code frame and you're happy with it, you can then use it to work through the rest of the data. So at this point, you might be looking through hundreds or even thousands of comments, depending on how big you need your sample size to be. But having a code frame will allow you to kind of systematically make sense of those larger volumes of data. So as you're kind of working through your larger data set, it's worth keeping an open mind because you might find that new codes crop up as you go deeper into the data. So you might want to add those into your code frame as they emerge, or you might want to include another code in your code frame so that you can capture all the different attributes as they come up, and then you can easily find them and you can group them later. As you code, it is really worth just sort of regularly pausing and stopping and checking your coding, just because if you're working through hundreds of comments, it can be really easy to kind of lose concentration or to start favoring certain codes. So go back, look at what you've done, make sure that it all looks okay. And for that reason, it can actually be really useful to work with multiple coders. So get some friends involved. And this isn't just to help you code more quickly, but to make sure as well that you're getting kind of more of an objective view of the data. So it's really important to collaborate here. You need to make sure that as a group of coders, you're all in agreement about what each code means. Check each other's work. If you notice that there are discrepancies in how different people are applying different codes, then talk that through and figure out why and why people are interpreting it in different ways. And if you do this across your data set, it will basically help you to get to a set of coding which is more accurate and more reliable. Okay, then once you've coded your data, it's time to get into the kind of real analysis part of it. So once you've kind of done that coding, you've essentially got a data set that's really easy to start spotting the key themes in and do both your quant and your qual. So I would always start with the quantitative analysis. And what you're doing here is you're basically looking across everything you've coded to find out what the key stories are in the data, what those high level themes are that are emerging. So at a basic level, you're looking for frequencies. So basically, which codes we use most often in the data. You might find there are some coding categories that get all the attention and others that kind of barely register. But this will show you where the audience's kind of needs are or what's really important to them. And then after frequencies, there's other things that you can look to understand as well. So we've talked about sentiment. So it might be that you look at, are there certain categories that are kind of more positively expressed or less positively expressed, or maybe they're polarized. And then it's diving into each of those categories to understand what's driving that positivity and negativity. You might start to notice different groups emerging in your data. So there might be different behavioral or attitudinal groups that you can start to cluster together. And then once you've got kind of different groups, you can look for relationships. So what I mean by this is if you know how, you can run cross tabs on your coding. So you can start to see how, say, a certain subgroup, how their responses change compared to another subgroup, or how a certain product, how people talk about a certain product type compared to a different product type. And then overall, what you're looking to understand here is what are the patterns in the data? What is the shape of the story which is emerging overall? So this type of analysis, your quant analysis stage, should give you a really good idea of what are the key areas of interest in your data and what you want to explore in more detail, which is where the qual analysis will come in. So before we get onto qual analysis, just want to show you quickly one example of kind of quant analysis in action. This is a slide from a real project which we did for a company. They had gone through a series of internal restructures and their employee retention scores were declining. So they basically wanted to understand what was driving this. So in the data, we coded out lots of different factors that employees were talking about, things like salaries and workload and the line managers. And we coded whether people were talking about these factors positively or negatively. And what this chart shows is the factors that people were most likely to be discussing negatively. So what you can see is we've actually run a crosstab here. So we've looked at how each of these factors, like salaries and workload, break down for different employee roles across the top. And you can see that there are certain factors which are more important for some roles and less important for others. So because we've coded the data here, we can confidently say to our client that these are the priorities for each of the different roles that you're interested in. Then, once you've done your quant analysis and you're starting to get a good idea of what some of those key themes are, it's time for your qual analysis. So this is where we kind of really dig deeper into the data and we start looking to pull out meaning and what's really going on. So at this stage, you'll basically be going back into your data and you'll be rereading different posts to uncover kind of what is the deeper meaning here. So a few tips to think about. Use your quant coding, your quant numbers to guide you. So which areas are most interesting? What areas are people talking about most often? What do you want to drill into more? And then you can filter the data by those different areas and look back through the comments and look to understand what's actually really going on here, what's happening and why. So if you see that people are talking negatively about workloads, you can go back and reread those posts where people talk about workloads and understand, well, what is it that's actually going wrong? What is it that's upsetting people? So as you do this, I would keep notes on the different kind of recurring points that you start to see and how they cluster together. Because as you read through the data, you'll start to see that there are different patterns emerging, you kind of keep thinking the same points over and over again. And this is when your key themes and your stories start to emerge. As you kind of uncover different themes and patterns, it's really important to keep asking yourself why. So what factors are actually driving the results that you're seeing? And it's also worth thinking about the context and the background. So what are the kind of the settings to the themes that you're starting to create? Where do they show up? Are there different cultural nuances or kind of social settings that are sitting behind what you're seeing? Then it's also, of course, important to refer back to your original research brief. Just make sure that you're answering the questions that you set out to, that you're kind of meeting those objectives. If you have had any kind of hypotheses, use the data to help you prove or disprove them. So once you've done this, you've done your qual analysis and you've done your quant analysis, you should have a really good idea of the key kind of stories that you want to tell your stakeholders or your clients, as well as quant data to back them up as well. So this is another example slide from a project. It's an example of how you might use qual analysis and what kind of insights that might give you. So this particular project was looking at the lack of diversity and inclusion in the advertising industry. And this slide, it shows some of the things that were acting as barriers to a more inclusive and diverse industry, as well as some of the things that we're working to kind of change things. So, I mean, what you can see looking at the text here is that we really went beyond quant numbers and we started pulling apart things like attitudinal factors and motivations, as well as the background context behind some of these different things. And this project essentially overall helped our clients to understand what they needed to focus on if they wanted to help to improve diversity and inclusion in the overall sector. Okay, so finally, I just wanted to give you a couple of pointers for presenting back social insight once you've done all your analysis. Because what we find is that social insight, it is an approach that can be unfamiliar to a lot of clients or to a lot of stakeholders. And so it is worth taking the time to position it right and talk people through a process up front so that they feel basically confident in the findings when you get to those. So when you're preparing for a presentation or a workshop, I would make sure that you're building in that extra time to talk through the approach and talk through any caveats, because this might take more time than usual compared to, say, a quant survey, which people tend to have a pretty good idea of what that is already. Because people are unfamiliar with the method, you might have more questions to answer than usual. So just make sure you're allowing time for that so it doesn't steal time from kind of the exciting stuff that you've got to present as well. Something that we find works quite well is, if possible, kind of engaging stakeholders before you actually get to the presentation. So basically educating stakeholders as early as possible and getting that all clear, making sure people are happy with that before you get to the big reveal and actually presenting the insights. And we also find that sort of early sessions with your client or your stakeholders to talk them through some of the initial findings, that can also be really useful in helping to kind of get that buy-in and get your client or your stakeholders' perspective on what the data all means. So I would recommend building in time for that where possible. The second point that I would kind of really encourage is to use real life examples as much as possible. So things like quotes and images and videos, include them in your presentation and allow people the space and the time to actually read them and absorb them. Because what we find is we can do, pages of charts or pages of qual analysis, but actually that never has as much impact as just having a killer quote or a kind of Instagram image or a TikTok video that just sums up what you're trying to say and brings the whole thing to life. It tends to make much more of an impact, and it can also help your audience to kind of grasp what you're trying to tell them much more quickly, particularly if it's a kind of a new or an exploratory project. When you're using examples, of course, do just be careful that you're presenting kind of a balanced view. You're not just cherry picking your favorite quotes, but you're making sure that they represent the kind of all the different stories which you're seeing in the data. And then finally, it's worth thinking about how you can use social insights, I guess, to bring people together. So what we find with social quite often, because we're being led by the data instead of having a kind of a narrow set of questions, we find that social reveals insight which is relevant across the business. So often there'll be implications for product teams and marketing teams and sales teams, innovation teams. So it's not necessarily just the team commissioning the research who might benefit from the results. So social insight debriefs can be a really great platform to actually bring those different silos and teams across the business together and use that session as a way to kind of bring people to a shared understanding and bring them to bring them to agreement about what the next step should be, help people work together to develop actions that will be more consistent. And obviously you can think about how to support this with the way that you actually present the data. So it might be that you use a workshop and you build in time to work together on what the actions should be. It might be that you make sure that you've left time at the end of the debrief for those more strategic discussions and getting people onto the same page. Kind of running out of time, so I'll just skip over this summary slide. But thank you very much for listening today. Hopefully it sparked some ideas for how you might improve or start your social data analysis. As always, if you need help with designing or running a social insight project, please do feel free to get in touch. Or if you fancy giving it a go for yourself, you can download our written guide from the website. We have got another webinar coming up later in the month, so on the 21st, we're going to be looking at what financial services brands can learn from TikTok. So it's a chance to see some social insight analysis in action. So apologies for overrunning a little bit. I'll just quickly see if there's any questions. Doesn't look like it. So yeah, thank you everybody very much for listening. Hope this has been useful and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.